evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We have the full complement of the round table, and that hasn't happened in weeks. So mark your calendars. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford, and I just a while ago had somebody tell me that they were looking forward to listening to this live. They wanted to know what Kelly Shackelford was going to be saying. Don't you know there's like a spring in his step today in light of all these Supreme Court decisions?
Well, I got a note from First Liberty that said they think it's Christmas in July, and this has been a good week and a very interesting week. And Kelly, I think you're on today.
Yeah, there's a few things going on.
It's wall-to-wall Kelly Shackelford, although we do have John Lott a little bit later.
Great.
That'll be in a couple of hours, because there was a shooting yesterday in Annapolis. And speaking of that, we did post the piece. It's Christmas in July. So right beneath Kelly is the piece that went out. And again, let me say, for some of you out there that are listening to this after the broadcast, you're saying, okay, it is July, but some of you listen to it now. So wait a minute, July's not till Sunday, but it's close enough. And let's talk about that. And what I want to do first, Kelly, is talk about the cases that most people don't know about. Over the last couple of days, we've talked about the travel ban. We've talked about NIFLA, or the Pregnancy Resource Centers. We've talked about the unions. And we've got into the whole question, of course, who might replace Anthony Kennedy. But there are a couple of cases that we have posted some information on that we have been following for some time. How about we start with Marianne Sauce? That is pretty amazing, because I was even last night talking to some people saying, can you believe that they even caused a problem by telling this poor woman she couldn't pray in her home? But now we have good news, don't we?
We do. It's surprising. It's surprising not because, we're shocked that we won or we were right on the law, but it's a case that has been sitting with the justices for a long time, and I think it was relisted maybe 15 different times. For those who don't know, what happens is the 9 justices sit, maybe once every 2 weeks, and they go into a room privately, nobody else there, just the justices, and they decide which cases they're going to take or do something on, maybe set for oral argument, and 99% of those cases are just cert denied. They don't take them. Well, Marianne Sauce sat there, and it was time for her case, which is about, it was a case about, again, people were like, when you tell them, they go, oh, I can't be true. And then they look at the case and they go, oh my gosh, it is true. And the question is, can police officers tell a woman that she's not allowed to pray in her own home? The Court of Appeals had said, well, this is so outrageous, these facts, that there's no case directly on point, and therefore maybe they didn't know, and so we're going to give them immunity. And so we took that to the Supreme Court, and it sat there, and it was time for a decision, and they said, oops, sorry, we're going to relist this to the next time. And then they got to that one. Oops, sorry, we're going to relist. Well, on the last day of the term, right, they issued the decisions, the term is over, they're on planes on their way to Europe for the conferences and things that they're doing. There's this miscellaneous list is what you call it. And on that list is Marianne Sauce saying, we are granting this case and we are reversing the decision below and sending it back down. And so poor Marianne Sauce, who's been waiting and waiting and waiting, and we've not only been praying for her case, we've been praying for Marianne because this has been difficult for her. But she's grinning ear to ear, and it's a good victory for everybody. But certainly it was surprising that you went from nothing to a total turnaround here right on the last day.
So the justices read the case, but there are no oral arguments, and they just make a decision. And that decision's announced after they're already
That's right.
dispersed.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's rare, but we kind of asked for this. In this case, when we filed to the Supreme Court, you can ask for what's called a summary reversal. It's rarely done, usually maybe a couple times a year. And what you say is essentially, you don't even need to take the case and hear it. I mean, you can just write an opinion and reverse it. And actually, our lead attorney below on that was Jim Ho.
Yes.
Who's now a federal court of appeals judge.
Fifth Circuit Court.
So anyway, and so that's what we were hoping for, but a very good decision for religious freedom, a very good decision for Marianne Sauce, and I think a good decision for the country, that we were able to get that turned around.
Yeah, this lady, I mean, I know that folks have heard Kelly describe the case, but it was actually, she was being prevented from praying in her own home.
It's amazing. I mean, she has been harassed in a number of different ways, but while they were harassing her in the home and searching her home, although they had no really reason to be searching her home, they were trying to intimidate her, and they said, we're going to find something. We're going to find some reason to charge you for something. Well, she was scared to death. She's a single woman in her home. And so she asked one of the officers while the other was running through her house, is it okay if I pray? And he said, do whatever you want. And she started praying. And then when the other officer came back, she said, what is she doing? And that's when they ordered her to stop. They told her she's not allowed to pray. So she on her own, I mean, she filed her own lawsuit, did the best she could. And it was only when we saw the decision below that we went, whoa, wait a second here, that we jumped in and were able to represent her on appeal and through the Supreme Court.
Great.
So again, one of those is Christmas in July. Another one, I wish this one was a complete win, but it's helpful. Supreme Court upholds the 6th District Court decision allowing legislative prayer, but it didn't really, as far as I understand, deal with the 4th Circuit. So explain that one. That's a little more complicated.
This was shocking to a lot of people. These are two cases that are almost exactly the same.
Right.
It's solely about whether a county commissioner can open up their meetings in prayer. The Supreme Court said just 3 years ago, can you have a chaplain open up the meetings in prayer? Yes. And so you'd think this would be solved, but no. The ACLU says, well, that's different. It's different if the county commissioner themselves are saying the prayer. Oh, you mean like when our founders themselves prayed before their congressional meetings? And why would it be, by the way, why would it be worse for a legislator to pray than for a paid chaplain to pray? Paid with federal taxpayer money, and that was upheld at the Supreme Court. So it's bizarre to me, but anyway, you had two of these cases going up. And the way it works at the Federal Court of Appeals is you get 3 judges at random, Federal Court of Appeals. But in a rare case, all 15 will say, you know what, this is so important, we're going to all sit and hear this together.
It's called en banc, right?
Called en banc.
Right.
And both in the 4th Circuit and the 6th Circuit, they said, we're sitting en banc. And they came to opposite conclusions.
Amazing.
Okay, so now the
That
law...
would be a perfect setup for the Supreme Court to
That's
take
what
the
the
case.
court's supposed to do. You can't have the Constitution changing when you drive across state lines.
Yeah.
And so those cases went up. Well, we won in Jackson County, Michigan.
Right.
Well, what happened is, again, on the last day, the court denied cert on both. In other words, they said, we're not going to take them. And everybody's like, what? You're just going to allow this to sit there? Now, in Jackson County, that's great because we won.
Yeah.
But in Rowan County, North Carolina, that's not great because that means we lost, and a dissent was written from denial of cert. That dissent was written by Justice Thomas and Justice Gorsuch, and they said, how can we not take this? The law is going to change from state to state. This is really intolerable.
Takes 4 to take a case, 5 to win. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The president and some members of Congress have started an important conversation about criminal justice reform, but while we're having that conversation, it is crucial that we get some of the facts straight. At a recent conference, Senator Elizabeth Warren lamented this country criminalizes low-level drug offenses. She said more people are locked up for low-level offenses on marijuana than for all violent crimes in this country. That makes no sense at all. She is certainly correct. It doesn't make any sense. That's because it isn't true. Rafael Mangual, in a recent op-ed, looks at the numbers. The total incarcerated population in the U.S. is just over 2.1 million. In the federal prisons, there is a high percentage serving time for drug offenses, but these are not pot smokers. Most are federal drug traffickers. In the state prisons, only about 15% are serving time for a drug offense. Again, the vast majority are in for trafficking. And it's worth mentioning that even the small percentage in for drug possession may have settled on that charge after a plea bargain. In addition to the argument that we're putting people in prison for minor drug offenses is the argument that we're also putting too many black men behind bars. Let's begin by stating the obvious. There is a racial disparity. African Americans make up about 13% of the population, meaning that black men make up about 6.5% of the American population. Nevertheless, they make up approximately one-third of state prison populations. The latest figures from the Bureau of Justice show that blacks constitute 35% of violent offenders, 45% of weapons offenders, 27% of property offenders, and 31% of drug offenders. Those figures explain why more black men are behind bars and illustrate why we need to get some of these facts straight. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, and Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford with us today. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to join the conversation, might also mention that we're in the last day of our end of fiscal year, and so we're going to talk about some of the opportunities for you to support this ministry, and we also want to talk about an opportunity for you to be praying for America, a critical time to pray, especially with a vacancy on the Supreme Court. But, Penna, let's come back to these cases. We have one out of the Fourth Circuit, one out of the Sixth Circuit, and the contradiction is something that bothers me. I'm sure it bothers a few other people.
I think it bothered some of the justices, and because it was mentioned that it's really untenable to have a policy in certain states that's different from policies in other states with regard to legislative prayer before public meetings. And, I'm just wondering, Kelly, because I was surprised, first of all, that there was a problem with these cases in the first place, because there was a Supreme Court case not that long ago that was in New York, I think the town of Greece, that actually went the way of religious liberty, allowing such prayer. But I guess Justice Thomas mentioned, and maybe this is the answer, that the person leading the prayer
that's the argument they're making. I mean, in town of Greece, you had a city, municipality, open their meetings with prayer from a chaplain, and which, again, that goes back to the founding of the country. We had a paid chaplain at the beginning of the country, and still to this day, a chaplain opens up the U.S. Congress with prayer. Well, the argument by the ACLU is, well, these prayers aren't by a chaplain. These county commissioners are themselves praying. And,
so if you're an elected official.
Right. And so that's the argument. But that doesn't really make any sense. I mean, as I mentioned, a paid chaplain is worse than somebody just praying on their own. And I just can't imagine why, our founders they prayed over, Congress as well. So, I just don't think that works. The Fourth Circuit is becoming a rival to the Ninth Circuit as the most liberal in the country. President Obama stacked it with a number of liberals, and so they're coming out with some of these, I think, really untenable, decisions. And this is an example of one that I think will eventually be overturned. It's shocking to me and shocking to most people that you have a circuit split where you have 8 or 9 states and the law now means different things in all these states, and that the court didn't take this and resolve it, but they didn't.
Are there any more cases that you know of with regard to this, that since this one
not on the way
is done?
It's so rare to have 2 on point like this, but I'm sure now there will be in the future, because this, people will cite whichever case they want to cite to justify the case, and so we're going to have, this is going to continue to bubble, and eventually the Supreme Court will have to take it.
Let's stay on the Fourth Circuit for just a minute for a couple of reasons. Later on, we'll be talking about what happened in Maryland and Annapolis, but also in the Fourth Circuit is the Bladensburg case. First of all, give us an update on that. And just again, an illustration of something we talked about the other day. It used to be that the Ninth Circuit Court was the most liberal court, the one that's overturned all the time. Fourth Circuit is in running for that now these days, isn't it?
What is in the Bladensburg Veterans Memorial case is a great example of how extreme that court has gotten. This is a Veterans Memorial that's been up for almost 100 years. It was put up to honor the 49 young men who died in Prince George's County in World War I, and put up in part by the money from the mothers who lost their sons in World War I. And the court consisted of 2 President Obama appointees and 1 Clinton appointee. And the Clinton appointee said, well, there's nothing wrong with, we have veterans memorials all over the country. There's nothing wrong with this. And the argument was, this is a cross. During the oral argument, one of the Obama judges said, you know what, if we just cut the arms off the cross, I think that we will be able to leave it there, and hopefully that'll take care of any offense. So we realized that we had some problems at that point, and sure enough, they ended up ruling 2-1 that this memorial that's been up almost 100 years is now all of a sudden unconstitutional. That's bad enough because of what it would do to that memorial, and the precedent it would set to tear down memorials all over the country. But it's even more heightened because the Fourth Circuit within its jurisdiction is Arlington National Cemetery. So all those freestanding large crosses would have to be torn down. That is, on Monday of this week, we filed in the U.S. Supreme Court saying, got to take this case. Most experts say that this is one at the top of the list. They can't imagine how the Supreme Court would allow this cross to be bulldozed essentially right nearby the court, knowing that Arlington is next. This is one that they think there's certainly a lot of pressure and reason that the court would need to really seriously look at. So that was filed on Monday, and we also filed on Monday in the Supreme Court the Coach Joe Kennedy case, which, of course, is Coach Joe Kennedy's the coach who was fired because after the football game he went to a knee for 15 to 20 seconds to say a silent prayer, thanking God for the privilege of coaching the players. And that's now gone through the Ninth Circuit, and it's now filed in the United States Supreme Court.
Well, with the news with Justice Kennedy stepping down and the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell saying there will be a vote, we'll have a new justice by the fall. These cases, if they do go to the Supreme Court, will hit at a great time for religious liberty, won't they? Yeah,
it'll be big. That's why this is so important. Look, one of the things I said from the beginning is I felt like Gorsuch was going to be a really, really good judge on religious liberty because he beforehand, as he's a lower court judge, Court of Appeals judge, than Gorsuch, and he was always right. I mean, sometimes he was in the dissent, sometimes he was in the majority. But whether it was the Hobby Lobby or any of these cases, you'd look at it and you go, oh, he's right again. Oh, he's right again. And so he was always right on point on protecting religious freedom in the First Amendment. And he's been that way all through the opinions and what he's written. And so now we've got to make sure that this person is. And so it's going to be really important. And I mean, that's just the beginning. Obviously, there's free speech, there's the Second Amendment, you just name the list of things. But I think this is going to be a really important one because Kennedy is the swing vote a lot of times.
Right.
There's four more conservative, four more liberal, and Kennedy goes back and forth on some issues. He ended really strong.
I'd say
Kennedy's
so.
opinions here at the end were excellent. But I want to point something out because people get confused on this. When I say conservative liberal, I'm not saying there's a typically want the justices to come to the result that they want. Conservatives, when it comes to proper judicial philosophy, they're not looking for a conservative result. They're looking for a judge to act like a judge. In other words, for a judge to say, my job is not to be a legislator. And so when we say conservative, we've got four members of the court who won't care what they believe on an issue. Their job is to simply apply the Constitution, apply this federal statute, whatever the result may be, even if they don't like the result. That's what is at play here. And so it's fascinating because liberal activists are going crazy right now because they're scared the court won't do its bidding. And the court's not supposed to.
No.
That's supposed to be up to the people to make those decisions in their state and federal legislatures.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about some of those potential nominees. But this week, we've been talking about how you can support this ministry, and I thought for just a minute you might like to hear what Vicki Garza has to say.
All my life, I always looked for ways to help people, but I would be frustrated because I didn't know how to help. And that's what I learned when I dialed in that day to Point of View. I learned how to help, not only myself and my family, but I also learned how to help others. And it's actually totally changed my life. We have this You Arise ministry now. It was started in January of 2012, and we're refining the model over here at SMU, but the idea is to bring health and wellness resources that are biblically based onto the campus through the RAs so that when they're approached by students in need and who have some sort of crisis happening in their lives, they will be trained and able. You don't know when you give to Point of View who you're touching and how much that person is going to be able to touch others. And ultimately, it could go out and touch thousands, even millions of people because you were willing to be a part of this ministry, to invest in this ministry. And I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
I love what she says. You know, you really don't know who you will have an impact on. Gifts in the past have had a chance to provide an opportunity for Vicki Garza and others to learn about some of these issues, to be educated, equipped, and most importantly, empowered to make a difference. So we challenge you as we are now on the very last day of our fiscal year. Ends today. So we need to hear from you. And if you would like to make a gift, you could do that right now during the break. And we won't miss any of the content we'll be talking about. Go to the website, pointofview.net. Or, of course, you can call the number 800-347-5151, our pledge line. We'll be right back.
Every story has the same conclusion, the end. For the past few weeks, we've been sharing quite a few stories with happy endings, stories that Point of View Truth Team members, listeners like you, have literally made possible. But today, we reach the final page of our fiscal year. What we accomplish together in the next 12 months will in great measure be based on what happens in the next handful of hours. If you have yet to give this month, or if you can give again and have your heroic impact doubled by our matching challenge, we are asking one more time, whatever the amount, your gift could write the next big story. This is it. The page is turning. Please don't let the book close without making one more phone call to 1-800-347-5151 or making a few simple clicks to pointofview.net. Invest in happy endings. Make a difference for the future, and that future is now. The clock is ticking. The end is here. Today is the final day. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. We have posted quite a number of articles, and one of those, Penna, is by our friend David French. What should America expect from a more originalist Supreme Court? And Kelly was sort of getting into that, but I thought it might be good for just a minute to again explain this, because I've seen interviews that Kelly's done where he's trying to get past this kind of bias that the reporters have. Well, you just want your guys on the court. No, I really want judges. I want umpires on the court. Sadly, on the other side, the liberals, you always can pretty much predict where the four liberals are going to vote in lockstep. That's not the case on the other side, but what does an originalist court really look like? What's your thoughts?
Well, you know, we've used the word in the past conservative in a couple of different ways, because conservative politically means one thing.
Sure.
But if you say, and we would say a lot that we'd like to see a conservative justice, but we weren't meaning that we wanted a politically motivated justice. We wanted someone who was in the definition of conservative would be that you interpret the law as it's written. And that's what originalist is. It's taking the meaning of that law when it was passed. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly. And, you know, the intent, the original intent of that law, and you interpret that. Whereas, you know, on the other side, the liberals on the court, they update the law in a sense. They cause it to morph to changing circumstances. And a law that's interpreted as an originalist isn't necessarily done in an old-fashioned way. It's just done in a way that doesn't change the original meaning because the justices and judges on courts are not meant to be lawmakers. Mm-hmm. And so they need to step back and take that originalist role, which is it's the role they're meant to have. So we're moving toward that now. I mean, that's the kind of justice that Gorsuch is. And from the list that we've seen that President Trump is probably going to pick from, or somebody like them, that's the kind of justice he's looking at. So that's a good thing for just the rule of law. And it says a lot for the future, because one thing that he has stressed is that he will appoint someone young who will, you know, God willing, be on the court for 40 or more years.
There's a lot of choices, a lot of good choices on the list. But yeah, I mean, the best example, which immediately pops up, the hot button ones that everybody always talks about is, you know, read the Constitution as much as you want. I challenge everybody. You're not going to find a right to an abortion in the Constitution. It's a creation of the court. And that's why there's so much talk about, you know, the justice. I mean, I don't think the next justice is probably going to change that, you know, necessarily. I mean, they're all freaking out about that. I mean, Justice Roberts is not exactly the type to, you know,
to overturn Roe versus
Wade. So, but that's the type of thing where you have these liberal justices that, you know, gay marriage and these things, again, not in the Constitution. If it's not in the Constitution, then it's up to the people, and those things should be debated and voted on, and et cetera, by the people. Now, part of the problem of why the court was given so much power is who was on the court. But part of the problem are the legislators, because they love to pass these hot button issues.
Very true.
Off and I'm sorry, the court, you know, we can't really go there. Then they don't have to take a stand on these controversial issues, whether it's gay marriage or abortion or whatever
affirmative
else.
Action, busing, you know, for decades, the courts have been willing to take the heat so that the legislators haven't had to address those issues.
That is not the design of our founders. That is not the way it's supposed to work. Why? Because judges make their decision in a back room with nobody watching, and there's no attempt to compromise, right? I mean, legislator, you hear all these people, it's all public testimony. There are attempts to improve. Well, you didn't think about this. Well, you didn't, and all out in the open, and you make decisions. And so the court was not supposed to be the legislature. And so, again, I think if President Trump is successful, which I think he will be, because if you look at his lower court appointments to the federal bench, they've been excellent, in my opinion. I mean, not just good. I mean, I think they're the best ever in the history of the country by any president, because politics have somewhat been removed, and that's really rare. So they're picking people who are very bright, are very committed to the Constitution, and are very much about setting their own views aside and simply doing what they're supposed to do as a judge. I think Trump will be successful in resetting the Supreme Court, and I think the Supreme Court will become much less relevant because instead of taking all these big issues out of our hands, I think that's going to return to the people to make these decisions on these difficult issues. I think it's better for the country. I think if we discuss these issues and the people who want to change things are able to win hearts and minds, they win that way. They actually, that actually is the type of change that can occur in the country. But when 5 people in a back room issue the decision, people don't accept that, and it just creates fights for long, long periods of time. Look at how long the abortion fight's been going on, right? 1973.
That's what happens when you don't legislate it.
Yeah. You go. Yep. I mean, you go through the democratic process not by trying to take these issues off the table.
Well, let me just pick up on the Roe versus Wade topic before we leave it, because I have seen a lot about liberals saying, oh, they're going to overturn Roe versus Wade, the right to abortion is at risk. And then, others who are more conservative downplay that. And so, Kelly, I'd like to know what you think, because it's been around, as you said, for so long. It doesn't make it any more constitutional, but it does make it just sort of part of the culture. We have, instead of blatantly trying to overturn it, most of the efforts among the pro-lifers have been to restrict abortion, to cut it back, how late you can do it, to make abortion clinics safer, to cause parental consent to be required, things like that. So do you think that it will just be a matter of a justice that would allow more restrictions, or do you think that Roe versus Wade still could be struck down?
Well, I think it will be someday. I just think it's illegitimate. And eventually things like Dred Scott, where it said that African Americans were property, they don't last.
Something that's really wrong is still wrong.
And in this case, they've done the same thing to, unborn children. And it's not in the Constitution. Anybody who's honest with you, reads the Constitution will go, well, you know what? I guess I missed that line about abortion, right? I mean, it's not in there. And because it's not in there, I mean, the Constitution doesn't deal with everything. They just deal with certain very, specific things. And outside of those areas, really, there's freedom, and the democratic process is supposed to work. You go through the legislature. So I think eventually that we will have and I'm not saying it'll be this justice, this one right now. In fact, I'm not real optimistic that, after this justice, that would change. Again, the liberals are all going crazy. I think they're really overblowing things there, just to try to whip up their people and all this. I think the reality is look, Kennedy is pretty, I'd say he voted with the conservatives 75% of the time. Mm-hmm. So I think a replacement of Kennedy with a, originalist justice, it'll affect some cases, but won't be a huge change. It'll be a little bit more of a center-right court than it was. Again, not in getting conservative results, because that's not the purpose. It just in getting judges that, best example I can give you on this is Gorsuch. A lot of people criticize Gorsuch this year because of this opinion about illegal immigrants who were here and committed a violent crime. And there was a statute that said, I think it was, or maybe it was aggravated or something. There was some terminology about you deport them.
But his dissent was, I think, well worded. Go ahead and explain that. He
ruled in a way that was in favor of not sending the criminal immigrant back. And people were like, oh, he's not a conservative. He's not a conservative. It's like,
no, he said, legislature, do your work.
It's exactly. He was a proper judge. He said this law is clearly ambiguous, which everybody pretty much agreed with, where you cannot tell what the meaning is. That's not my job as a judge. I'm sending this back. The legislature needs to fix this. That is a conservative judge. That's a proper judge. And so it's not about what the result is on the political scale, because I'm sure Trump didn't like that result on the political scale, but he did his job. That's the kind of justice I think we'll get. And I think we're going to I think Trump's going to have more choices. I think this court is eventually going to be back more to a proper court. And I think all the activism of the court is going to be really tamped down. And it's going to be, which I think is great because it's going to be sent back out across the country. And it's going to be up to the type of people listening to this show on what happens in their communities and their states on these issues.
That Gorsuch dissent was one I was just thinking about, and it kind of relates back to the piece by David French, in which he said, you know, in the words of one of my leftist law professors, you determine the outcome first, then you do your reasoning. Time after time, that's exactly what Justice Anthony Kennedy appeared to do. But Neil Gorsuch said, if you didn't do your legislative job, don't expect me to be a legislature. Sending it back, you fix it. I like those kind of judges. We need more of them. We'll be right back.
The Trump administration has just made it easier for small businesses to offer health insurance to their employees. Obamacare didn't change the health insurance picture much for large companies, but it imposes rules and mandates on small businesses that have raised their costs and caused more and more of them to decide not to offer health insurance to employees at all. The Department of Labor has finalized a rule that will enable more employers to form association health plans, AHPs. Implementation began last week. Alex Acosta, U.S. Secretary of Labor, describes how these health plans work in a Wall Street Journal op-ed entitled, "A Health Fix for Mom-and-Pop Shops." He writes, small businesses, including self-employed workers, may band together by geography or industry to obtain health care coverage as if they were a single large employer. This new scale and access, he writes, means AHPs can offer more options at a better price. These AHPs will enjoy the economies of scale and larger risk pools that large companies benefit from. And like large companies, they will escape requirements to provide many comprehensive benefits mandated under Obamacare. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that in the next few years, around 4 million Americans will enroll in AHPs, and of those, 400,000 will be folks who are currently uninsured. The plans will still be subject to Obamacare's rules regarding coverage for pre-existing conditions and its bans on lifetime limits. Congress still could and should repeal the Affordable Care Act. Obamacare is also being challenged again in court. The individual mandate to purchase health insurance, with its penalty, which the Supreme Court earlier ruled was a tax, was done away with in the 2017 tax cut bill. So 20 states are suing again to strike down Obamacare. Meanwhile, this new rule chips away at Obamacare. Secretary Acosta says President Trump will take action to provide whatever relief is within executive authority. The relief is welcome. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Everyone's going to, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. Let me just mention that as we've been talking about this vacancy on the Supreme Court, in the next segments we'll probably get into some of the conversation about who those individuals might be. But we believe this is going to be quite a fight. And as I said in my video yesterday, you know, it's not our first rodeo. We've seen this before. Judge Robert Bork, we've seen Clarence Thomas, and seen some of the others. So we know it's going to be quite a battle. There's going to be a lot of misinformation and wrong information. So one of the things we've encouraged you to do is visit our website, pointofview.net. In the middle section there, it says Take Action, and it's a critical time to pray. And there's where you can sign up just to receive our Pray for America updates. You can either give us your email, and we'll email them to you, or give us our snail mail address. And what we'll do is, first of all, give you some prayer targets as we begin to talk with individuals and learn a little bit more about what's happening. Of course, we'll soon know who that nominee will be, and also just to provide you with some of the information necessary. So we've had a number of you sign up to receive the prayer material that we will send out on a regular basis. And if you haven't done so, visit the website, pointofview.net, click on that Take Action button, and we'd love to be involved in the battle for prayer. And it is a spiritual battle, isn't it, Penna?
It is. And, by the way, as we are talking today a little bit about us coming on our fiscal year end, when you think about the information that you can get, not only through the website, but on the radio show, and the helps, the tools that we give people to get involved or to make their statement, their support of a certain issue or their opposition to that issue known. I mean, these are all reasons to support Point of View. So I just want to throw that in right now because I think we are unique among radio ministries and communications ministries in all that we offer.
Well, and I have a lot of people say I never miss Friday because I know I'm going to be hearing Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. And if not, we are going to bring some other individuals that will bring conversation to the table. And I just time and time again open up letters and go to email addresses where people say, I hear these things only on Point of View. I didn't even hear it on other talk radio because, again, we have such a strong emphasis on things that are important to your faith, your family, and your freedom. But we're talking about this idea of originalist on the Supreme Court. You've got a couple other pieces that you found here on David French's piece, didn't you?
Well, this is posted right at pointofview.net.
Yes, it is.
So
First
here,
article.
Here's something for people to take. I think would be great to pass out because he's kind of projecting what we can expect when, not if, when we get a more originalist court. And one thing, of course, would be, and we've talked a lot about the collision between the sexual revolution and the First Amendment, and often the First Amendment. Well, it will be the opposite as the court becomes more originalist. For instance, he mentions the Masterpiece case, which was decided basically because of the animus that was shown against Jack Phillips. And it wasn't a real solid propping up of the First Amendment, but you would have a better, stronger decision under a more originalist court. So that's one. And then David French also says the court will offer greater clarity on the Second Amendment, which is needed. And interesting majorities, he says, protecting civil liberties from police abuse. And again, that will be welcome. And also a more colorblind court, because we've seen so much confusion with the affirmative action rulings. And so, in a sense, we need more clarity there. So I think, in a sense, you're going to get some more, less ambiguity in the law as, the years go by, especially if we add more and more justices. I think President Trump will probably get another one or two, perhaps.
And that's, again, one of those prayer targets we're going to put out immediately because you talked about the Masterpiece Cake Shop. Wouldn't it be good to get a decision that's a little more definitive? And that sounds like Aaron and Melissa Klein out of Oregon. And so that's a very significant prayer target, isn't it?
Absolutely. We just got a decision by the Oregon Supreme Court that they weren't going to take the case, which means that, we'll be going next to the U.S. Supreme Court. So this new court, one of the first things that'll be coming their way to decide about whether they take or not is sweet cakes, which is the Aaron and Melissa Klein's case, really a lot like Jack Phillips. And it will give them the opportunity to do what they said in the Masterpiece case, which is they were kind of leaving these big decisions for a future case. In that case, there was bias in the tribunal against Jack because of his religion. And so that was easy to resolve the case on that. But they said in the future, we'll have to decide, these issues, and I think it could very well be the Kleins. We'll have to wait and see.
Well,
there was bias in the Klein case, but I think one big difference is Jack Phillips, though he did lose a lot of his business, he didn't lose his whole business.
Yeah,
the
Kleins
lost the right to
$130,000 and also told him not to talk about it.
That's right.
Jack Phillips didn't deal with half of that kind of anger and go ahead.
And is bankrupted. Yeah. I mean, the client, Sweet Cakes, is bankrupted because of what the government did. I mean, this is really, really dangerous when the government can destroy your business because they don't like your beliefs. And so that's why these last opinions from the Supreme Court on NIFLA and on Janus were both really important because they both involved whether the government can compel you to say things or punish you. And, whether they got to charge you money or whether they're going to fine you or cite you or whatever. That's what these cases ultimately are about. And the point that I think was made well by a lot of the justices in these different cases is, if the government has a message it wants to get out, the government is perfectly capable of expressing its own message.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that it has to commandeer me or you or those listening and say, no, we're going to force you to say what we want you to say. I mean, to me, that's just the ultimate intolerance. I mean, that is when you have lost all freedom, and there's no reason for it. There really is no justification. I mean, take NIFLA. If the government wants to tell everybody that you can get a free abortion in California, the government's perfectly capable of doing that. The idea that they have to commandeer the crisis pregnancy centers and get them to communicate the message, that's just pure oppression. And so that's what's going on in a lot of these cases, and that's why these are important victories that we've been getting.
Well, again, that's maybe why many people refer to Justice Kennedy's decision as being the hammer, because it specified that it had to be on 8.5 by 11 paper, had to be at least 22-inch point type. It was so specific, and then the law was written so that it applies to only pregnancy centers, nothing else, and then to actually say that you don't have a license when you don't have to be licensed in the first place. It was just so draconian that finally I think Justice Kennedy had enough with the bullies. He didn't like the bullies in Colorado, but he certainly didn't like the bullies in California.
No, it's odd always to see Justice Thomas writing the sort of more moderated opinion and Justice Kennedy writing the really tough concurrence. It's usually the other way around, because whoever's right in the majority has to have everybody agree with it, and so it can't be quite
moderated.
Yeah.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, let's get into those cases in a little more detail, because we posted this the other day on just these anti-free speech cases, compelled speech. Censorship of speech is bad enough, but then when the government tells you not only what you can't say, but exactly how you're supposed to say it and how you're supposed to write it, that just goes too far, and that's why you have some of those decisions. But I will acknowledge that we still have 4 Supreme Court justices that even in those cases simply can't bring themselves to say that compelled speech is wrong. And so this is why that's another prayer target, but we'll get to that later. Let me just mention as we go to a break here, we do have our website, pointofview.net, where we have a donate, and a number of you have wanted to join with us. And let me say, this is the last day. So if you've been waiting, time is up, and we do have a matching fund. So that means your gift of $100 becomes $200. $200 can become $400. And so let me encourage you to do that. And I'm not asking you to do something I haven't done myself. So again, we encourage you to support this ministry. A one-time gift would be appreciated. And if you'd want to join us on a monthly basis, that would be even better. If you'd like to talk to someone off air, that is certainly a possibility as well. 1-800-347-5151. And we're going to come back and continue our conversation with Penna, Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and maybe just review some of these cases as the Supreme Court session is over. Your liberties are no longer. More about these cases right after this.
Every story has the same conclusion: the end. For the past few weeks, we've been sharing quite a few stories with happy endings, stories that Point of View Truth Team members, listeners like you, have literally made possible. But today, we reach the final page of our fiscal year. What we accomplish together in the next 12 months will in great measure be based on what happens in the next handful of hours. If you have yet to give this month, or if you can give again and have your heroic impact doubled by our matching challenge, we are asking one more time, whatever the amount, your gift could write the next big story. This is it. The page is turning. Please don't let the book close without making one more phone call to 1-800-347-5151 or making a few simple clicks to pointofview.net. Invest in happy endings. Make a difference for the future, and that future is now. The clock is ticking. The end is here. Today is the final day. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. Thank you for joining us. I know a lot of people have been looking forward to this. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford in studio. Even had people saying, I wonder what Kelly's thinking about all these decisions coming down. And I've had people say, I bet Penna's got some commentaries coming up on this as well. So this is going to be a great opportunity this hour. And as we look at three very significant decisions this week on the travel ban, on pregnancy resource centers and unions. And if that's not enough, then we also have an open seat that will open up by the end of July in the Supreme Court. Penna, I think we've got lots to cover, don't we?
You know what's fun about Point of View is that on a Monday, we cannot plan our Friday show. We absolutely can't do it because you don't know what's going to happen during the week. And this was one of those weeks where there were so many things that transpired with regard to the things that we love to talk about here on Point of View that we had no clue on Monday what we'd be doing today.
I will say this, we'll brag a little bit about our staff. We sent out a deal this week at First Liberty that said, get ready for early fireworks for the 4th of July.
So you knew?
But we understated it. We had no idea. We knew we were filing on Coach Kennedy on Monday. We were filing on the Bladensburg Veterans Memorial on Monday. We knew that NIFLA would probably be coming down. That the union case is probably be coming down. We did not know that we were going to win in our SAWS case at the very last day. We did not know that Justice Kennedy was going to be stepping in. So we knew a little. I feel like we not only had the 4th of July, but maybe Christmas this week, all kind of packed in one.
That's why we posted one of those articles. It's a Christmas in July, and I admit that some of you are not listening to this program in July, but it's close enough. And again, that's just what's so incredible. To paraphrase somebody, I don't think you're tired of winning yet, and you have been winning time and time again. Let's take one of the cases that you were not involved with, but we certainly have talked about, and that is the travel ban, because the argument has always been that this is an anti-Muslim ban. Now, Penna, I have trouble making that case when I look at the fact that there were only 5 Muslim-majority countries on that ban of the original 9 that went down to 8 and eventually down to 7. But again, as Justice Alito pointed out, it would only affect all of 8% of the Muslim population. So it seems to me that if you thought it was a ban on Muslims, you're really looking at the wrong issue, because it had to do with the countries, not the people.
Venezuela is not a Muslim country, yet it's one of the countries that is involved in the ban. And so
North Korea.
And North Korea, same thing. But really, this was the third iteration of this order, and it's an order limiting entry to the U.S. of nationals from 8, now 7 countries that are unwilling or unable to cooperate in U.S. anti-terrorist screening efforts. So it's the countries where you can't screen adequately to be relatively certain that you aren't bringing in terrorists. This is a national security issue, and this is what the court basically declined to get involved in the foreign policy and the national security parts of the president's job. They really affirmed the president's responsibility and ability and power to do this. So it was a wonderful decision. It was a victory for the rule of law.
Kelly, I got to come to you, because it seems to me that our 4 liberal justices said, well, but, candidate Donald Trump said some nasty things on the campaign trail. And even if you think that he's anti-Muslim, and I don't think that he is, you're supposed to be like an umpire. You're supposed to be a judge. Look at the policy. Whether you like the president or not, aren't you supposed to evaluate? When I look at my Constitution, isn't Article 2 say the president is the commander-in-chief and the individual that is to protect the borders? What am I missing here?
Yeah, no, I thought this was easy from the beginning. There are three powers, right? There's separation of powers. There's the president, the executive branch, there's the legislature, and there's the courts. And in this area, the president has a lot of power. This is foreign policy. This is protecting our country. He's the commander in chief. I mean, the executive branch has a lot of power. The legislature has power too. But in this case, the legislature passed a statute giving the president the power. So you have the government essentially saying all the power is residing in the president to make these decisions. For the court to overturn that, it better be very, very clear and serious, or else I think the court is way overstepping their bounds. And so what do they have? Well, they've got that when he was a candidate, he said so-and-so. And that's just not good enough. I mean, the idea of taking away the president's power, the president's and the Congress's power in an area of national security, that's not going to work. It reminds me a little bit. It's kind of like, let's say that they said, this candidate was running for local office in your city. And he said, if I get elected, we're going to put stop signs that only apply to Muslims. It's going to say Muslim stop. And let's say that he gets elected. And instead of that, a stop sign goes up that just says stop for everybody. You can't go and say, that's against the law. He put up a stop sign. I mean, that's essentially what they've done because you look at what he actually passed. And it was the third chance. They tried to make sure it was clearer and clearer and clearer. But it didn't focus on people because they're Muslim. It focused on particular countries that were having problems with security. This is stuff that was sent out to all of our government to analyze, to look at where we're having problems and all that. So I think the thing that was it was disappointing to me. This should have been 9-0.
Me too. That's what I said.
This is like politics at its worst. I mean, I'm embarrassed for the 4 liberal justices because whether you like the president or not, whether you like his approach or not, this is a power that the president has to try to protect the country. And I really don't think there's anything on the face of that statute that they can complain about. This is just them not liking him. And that's kind of sad, I think, for justices to be like that.
Yeah, I think one of the more outrageous parts of it was Sotomayor's dissent, where she talked about the Korematsu decision versus the United States. The judges upheld Roosevelt's order interning Japanese Americans, and she brought that in, which Roberts just totally kind of basically refuted that. But in a sense, of course, that decision, then they were able to repudiate the decision just in the dissent. But for her to even bring that up,
I know
it first of all showed intellectually that she's not with the rest of them sometimes. But also, it was pretty out there for her to even do that.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about some of what David French in his piece that we posted called the Anti-Free Speech Authoritarians. Now, one of those we've sort of already alluded to, and that would be the Masterpiece Cake case. But then that one is just one of 2 others that came down this week. One, we talked about NIFLA, which again relates to about 135 pregnancy centers in the state of California, where the California government, first the California Assembly, then the Senate, then the governor, passed a piece of legislation, and then I guess we shouldn't be surprised the Ninth Circuit Court went along with it, that mandated that you basically promote abortion in a pregnancy resource center. And then we'll get to the case out of Illinois, which has to do with mandatory union dues. And all 3 of those get into compelled speech. And that is a practice of forcing Americans to fund or express ideas that they find abhorrent. And at least twice, Justice Alito quoted from Thomas Jefferson. Remember that? To compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical. Good job. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The president and some members of Congress have started an important conversation about criminal justice reform. But while we're having that conversation, it is crucial that we get some of the facts straight. At a recent conference, Senator Elizabeth Warren lamented this country criminalizes low-level drug offenses. She said more people are locked up for low-level offenses on marijuana than for all violent crimes in this country. That makes no sense at all. She is certainly correct. It doesn't make any sense. That's because it isn't true. Rafael Mangual, in a recent op-ed, looks at the numbers. The total incarcerated population in the U.S. is just over 2.1 million. In the federal prisons, there is a high percentage serving time for drug offenses, but these are not pot smokers. Most are federal drug traffickers. In the state prisons, only about 15% are serving time for a drug offense. Again, the vast majority are in for trafficking. And it's worth mentioning that even the small percentage in for drug possession may have settled on that charge after a plea bargain. In addition to the argument that we're putting people in prison for minor drug offenses is the argument that we're also putting too many black men behind bars. Let's begin by stating the obvious. There is a racial disparity. African Americans make up about 13% of the population, meaning that black men make up about 6.5% of the American population. Nevertheless, they make up approximately one-third of state prison populations. The latest figures from the Bureau of Justice show that blacks constitute 35% of violent offenders, 45% of weapons offenders, 27% of property offenders, and 31% of drug offenders. Those figures explain why more black men are behind bars and illustrate why we need to get some of these facts straight. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, and we certainly have a lot to talk about. There's a spring in Kelly Shackelford step, and Penna, Dexter, and Kelly are both smiling here. But let's get into these compelled speech issues. The first one, Penna, you're well aware of because you've done some very good commentaries. By the way, if you don't already receive Penna's Viewpoints commentaries, we have her one up already. It will show up in your inbox tomorrow, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But you've written about this and are very familiar with the fact that NIFLA was the Association of Various Pregnancy Centers. And in California, the government, and I'm talking about the state government, decided to force these institutions to promote abortion in their pregnancy centers, and then also have to tell people that if it was just a counseling center that they weren't licensed. Well, you don't have to be licensed to be a counseling center. So it was really over the top, as illustrated by the fact that if you've read the opinion by Anthony Kennedy, he really brought the hammer down on them, didn't he?
Yeah, well, Thomas wrote the opinion, and he said California cannot co-opt the licensed facilities to deliver its message for it. California's message, of course, they're all about providing abortion to poor people. And so they wanted the crisis pregnancy centers to post that, to make sure that as they are helping people with their pregnancy and this time in their life, they have to make sure that everybody there that comes in there knows through posting something saying that you can get a free abortion through Medicaid in the state of California. Well, that's compelled speech. That is the ultimate, I think, extent of compelled speech, and this was struck down by the court. The other thing that this fact law required in California was if you were not a licensed medical facility, that you had to post that fact to. In other words, it would put doubt in the minds of some people. When you think about someone going to those places, they're usually in a bad time in their life. To see that, to say, oh, maybe this place is not good, they're not medical, they're having to post that in several languages in large type. And so both of these components of it were struck down, and it was a wonderful decision in a sense, just putting the kibosh, I think, on this real attack on pregnancy centers.
There's a lot of great things in this, and a lot of facts that are just outrageous. But I think Penna hit the first major point, which is compelled speech. Compelled speech is the ultimate intolerance, okay? If the government wants to communicate this message in California, they're fully capable of getting information out on where people can get their free abortions or whatever. There's no reason they have to force other citizens to express the message. Now, and if you think it's just an accident that the pregnancy care centers were the ones who got, if you look at the law, it like only applies to them.
That's right.
So, and then if you look back at the statements made by the legislators admitted that they were targeting them. So imagine that the government is targeting a specific group of people because of their beliefs, and then they want to force them to say something that violates their belief. And there's no reason for that. I mean, to me, compelled speech is the ultimate intolerance. It's the ultimate violation of the First Amendment, because it's not like the message can't get out without forcing people to violate their conscience. So I think this is thank goodness that again, if anything is disappointing about this, it's that it's not 9-0.
There you go again.
This should be obvious. I mean, Justice Kennedy is coming out of the chute on this one. I mean, the guy that's supposedly the moderate, right? Well, he was not moderate in this concurrence. He called this what it was, and he really hit the hammer on it. And it's because it should be. Everybody should have done that.
And again, this is kind of interesting, as this particular article says. Justice Thomas, who is the one that wrote the majority opinion, wielded the scalpel, but Justice Kennedy brought the hammer, and he even suggested the legislators might want to go back to this text which was ratified in 1791 called the First Amendment.
Yes.
I mean, he really came at them, and that's kind of odd. Usually, if you're looking for the hammer, it's usually in the hands of Justice Clarence Thomas, isn't it? But because he had to write the majority opinion, it's a little different, right?
And I really feel like Kennedy went out with a bang.
Yes,
I mean, he knew,
I think so.
He knew he was going out, and he went out with some strong pro-First Amendment opinions. I mean, look, people look at Masterpiece and they say, oh, gosh, I wish they'd have decided this issue for all the wedding vendors. They didn't. And so maybe our Klein case, maybe another case will be the case. One of the future cases will do that. But he still did something really good. He, for the first time, laid out that, look, if we have government officials that have a hostility or an animus to people because of their religion, that's unconstitutional. And he wrote a really good decision, at least calling that out and saying we're not going to allow that. So you add that to NIFLA and then to the Union case, and Justice Kennedy went out with a lot of strength on the First Amendment.
In a sense, I think this was a justice, and Kelly, maybe you could weigh in, that he was concerned about his legacy. And so I'm glad. I mean, yeah, we can go back to some other decisions like Obergefell, but he was concerned about his legacy, and I think he wanted to be seen as a champion for free speech and freedom of religion, didn't he?
I think so, yeah, and I think he always considered himself a champion for free speech, for freedom of religion, but he also considered himself a champion for gay rights, and so that's why these other decisions, it was really difficult because he had two of those conflicting. And he found a way through that in Masterpiece, and I think he's probably happy to pass that on to the next group of justices in the future.
Last week, one of your colleagues from First Liberty, Lathan Watts, was here, and he was predicting that this Kennedy would step down. He said Kennedy is at the end of the ability to be able to straddle his protection of gay rights along with his protection of religious liberty, that the cases that will come now, he will not be able to do that, so it's a good time for him to leave.
And see, I think there's a really easy way to do that, which is, you have the right to live your life how you want in the LGBT community. But Look, the one thing that we know in this country is people have different beliefs on gay marriage and these issues. But I think the one thing we used to all agree on is people have a right to have different beliefs on these issues. Yeah. And so that's how there's a plenty big enough country for us to all live together. And there's no reason. Yeah. Right. There's no reason to force people. Again, it's back to the same concept in NIFLA. There's no reason to force the crisis pregnancy centers to express a pro-abortion message. There's no reason for that. And there's no reason to try to find the bakers, the florists. There's not a huge number of them who have a problem providing these services in a wedding. There's no reason to try to force them to participate in a celebration that violates their faith. I mean, marriage was created by God. It's considered sacred by pretty much everybody around the world. Let people have their beliefs on marriage and leave them alone. I think that's most Americans, and I think that's where we're going to end up when we're done.
Let's take a break. We'll come back and talk about the Union case, the Janus case, and then we'll get into some of the possible replacements, some of the possible nominees that Donald Trump may come forward with. But if you've been listening this week, you know we have now come to the end of our week, and this is the end of our fiscal year. We do need your financial support, and if you have not already done so, we want to encourage you to visit the website pointofview.net. But also, I thought it would be good to hear from someone else who was influenced by Point of View, and that's Michelle Bachman.
I was about 19 years old when I first met my husband, and he brought me out to the farm in Wisconsin where he lived with his parents. And every day at noontime, the radio came on, and my in-laws had the radio tuned to the Christian radio station, and it was Marlon Maddox's Point of View that came on. So I was still getting my footing for my faith. And this was very important because what Point of View taught me was the intersection of current events with my faith in Jesus Christ. And I just loved the show. I loved Marlon Maddox's personality. He was cutting edge. All the new things that you'd hear about in the news, he would be talking about on the radio station, but from a biblical worldview perspective. He very profoundly shaped a lot of my thinking during that time, and we couldn't wait to listen to it. Kerby does such a fabulous job. I've enjoyed being on the show with Kerby. It's needed now more than ever because it seems like too few pastors are willing to say from the pulpit what they need to say today. That's why I think that Kerby Anderson, what he's doing on Point of View, is probably more needed now than ever because we need to be hearing this on the radio if we aren't going to be getting it from our pulpits.
You know, one of the things that I remember, Penna, you maybe remember it, when we interviewed homemaker Michelle Bachman before she even ran for the legislature. And that goes back a few decades, but we've seen her career really begin to blossom in a number of different ways, and she owes a lot of it, she says, to listening to Point of View.
Listeners across the country that are like she was. In a sense, Point of View influences them not only to know how to think, but maybe to get involved in some way, and certainly helping them understand current events and politics and things. Now, she went on to become a member of Congress, and, you know, others that are listening now might do that, but there are so many things that can, you know, your life can be directed through really having a good understanding of what's going on in the culture.
So visit the website. We'd love to hear from you. We'll be back right after this.
Every story has the same conclusion: the end. For the past few weeks, we've been sharing quite a few stories with happy endings, stories that Point of View Truth Team members, listeners like you, have literally made possible. But today, we reach the final page of our fiscal year. What we accomplish together in the next 12 months will in great measure be based on what happens in the next handful of hours. If you have yet to give this month, or if you can give again and have your heroic impact doubled by our matching challenge, we are asking one more time, whatever the amount, your gift could write the next big story. This is it. The page is turning. Please don't let the book close without making one more phone call to 1-800-347-5151 or making a few simple clicks to pointofview.net. Invest in happy endings. Make a difference for the future, and that future is now. The clock is ticking. The end is here. Today is the final day. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I know most of you just want to sit back and listen, and I don't blame you because we have two experts in the studio here giving us some perspective, and earlier in the week we've talked about some of these cases. But if you have a comment or a question, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, we've been talking about this idea of compelled speech, and whether it's compelled speech using your artistic talents, and that's the masterpiece cake story, or whether it's compelled speech of using your voice, and that would be the Pregnancy Resource Center case out of California. There's another aspect, and it's compelled speech of using the money in your pocketbook or purse, and that's the Janus case on unions. What about that one?
Well, this case and the decision holds that public sector unions can no longer force government workers to pay dues or these agency fees, and the argument was that they were still benefiting from collective bargaining, so they should have to pay for it. But there's so much more that happens because the dues goes to public sector unions, and then they use that money to lobby state legislators. And often that lobbying results in more government workers and giving them higher wages and benefits. And, you know, we see across the nation all these problems with states having to fund their retirement and benefits for government workers. So it turns out to be a terrible situation that needed to be remedied. And it almost was in another case with regard to teachers' unions, the Fredericks case, but then Justice Scalia died, and so it was a 4-4 decision. So it had to be revisited with Neil Gorsuch on the court. And the court, this was a big ruling, and it has major repercussions, I think, for politics because the unions are so supportive of the left and Democrats. So this was another case that shut down the idea of compelled speech because the speech is your money in this sense, and having to fund a message that you did not agree with. So it's another real victory for freedom.
Yeah, I think, again, it's in this line of cases of compelled speech, and I've always thought this was just completely wrong. Didn't even understand how this had been allowed to go on for so many years. The idea that, that the government could force you to give money to somebody if you want to work, and the money you give is used to say things you don't agree with. That's just wrong. It's not a free country. So I think this is a great thing. Look, it doesn't take away people who want to be a part and contribute. This is about non-members to the union, and they should have the freedom to not have their money taken and being used to express things they disagree with.
But again, this wasn't a 9-0 either, was it?
No.
5-4, 5-4, 5-4. If I can give credit to Justice Alito, Samuel Alito, he said when speech is compelled, he talks about there's more damage than just that because in that situation, individuals are coerced into betraying their convictions. Mm-hmm. So it's not just that you have to say what the government tells you, but then you have to betray yourself. And he says forcing free and independent individuals to endorse ideas they find objectionable is always demeaning. And for this reason, one of our landmark free speech cases said that the law commanding involuntary affirmation of objected to beliefs would require even more immediate and urgent grounds than a law demanding silence. And on two separate occasions, he quotes from Thomas Jefferson, that famous quote about to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical. But again, you could not get four justices to even say in that case it was wrong. As a matter of fact, they started wagging their finger, Penna, and saying, well, we've got this decision that's been, as if once a decision is made, decades ago, that you could never overturn that. But that's just, again, an illustration of the fact that there are four individuals that just vote in a block. And even when we're dealing with compelled speech, they can't even have one of them separate out and say, well, maybe that's a problem that we should look at.
Well, it's a sign of the political divide in the country and the fact that we don't have an originalist court, at least in many of the decisions and the cases. And so they want a political outcome, and, they're going to be in support of this speech that will uphold the left and the Democrats, and they're not going to do anything to weaken that. But in this case, thanks to the the fifth justice that was appointed and took the bench, we now actually had a good decision on this, and it's a real victory. It was the last major decision that was handed down, that was announced. And it was one that really, we didn't talk about it as much here at Point of View, but it was one that the whole country was waiting for, and it went the right way.
Yes. Well, and again, in the next hour, we're going to have John Lott with us briefly because we had a shooting in Annapolis, and also we're going to hear about some of Kelly's specific cases for First Liberty. But I know that so far I've heard a number of people saying, okay, I want to hear what Kelly has to say about the possible nominees. So let me put a few names up there. I know that there's a lot more you could say than you can say on the air, so we understand that. But first of all, a lot of people have said maybe a possible nominee is Brett Kavanaugh from Maryland. He's on the D.C. Circuit Court, 52 years of age. He was a clerk for Justice Anthony Kennedy. He's a graduate of Yale College and Yale Law School. Well, that's not so bad. Also nominated to the D.C. Court in 2003, but I love this, was not confirmed until 2006. We had the slow walk even under the Bush administration. I think it was the Democrats doing that, wasn't it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so, nevertheless, one quote, and I'll get Kelly's comments. Former Attorney General William Barr stated that Kavanaugh has quickly established himself as one of the key outside lawyers I went to on some of the toughest legal issues. He has a keen intellect, exceptional analytical skills, and a sound judgment. His writing is fluid and precise, and I found that he was able to see all sides of an issue and appreciate the strengths and weaknesses of competing approaches. So at least he's one person that people are talking about.
Yeah, let me, a couple of things that we know for sure, or I feel very confident about, is that the president will end up choosing somebody who's really good. And I say that because we have a track record.
Yeah, we have a lot of good ones on the list.
And not just Gorsuch, who was picked last time, who was an excellent choice. He's been just an excellent justice. But all these lower court, district court, court of appeals, we've just been watching and participating and helping, and it's been one really good, solid person after another. This is, again, I don't think there's any president who is appointed as many quality people as this president has to the courts. It's mainly because the politics is not so entwined like it usually is. It's, well, so-and-so's brother really helped you for the election, and so you really ought to put him on the court. That's not what's happening. They're picking the brightest, the most committed to the Constitution, the ones with the right philosophy that will put themselves aside and do a proper judicial role. And so I fully expect there to be a great decision by the end of the process. The other thing we know is whoever they pick will be Satan incarnate, immediately.
Yeah, which is why we're encouraging people to sign up for our prayer thing so we can give them some updates and some prayer targets. Yeah,
and look,
it's going to be a battle.
It is, and if you remember last time, I thought the visual for the whole thing last time was. Remember, they were waiting outside at the Supreme Court for who was going to be announced, and they had these signs that said all these horrible things about, and then there was a blank. They were going to fill in their name, and I thought that just said it all. To me, that just
anybody,
whoever it is, they're going to be whatever we're about to say, and they've already said it. They've already said we're going to oppose, we're going to whatever. They don't even know who the nominee is, so people just need to be ready for crazy silliness. None of it matters because the Republicans don't need a single vote. They will get votes. If you're Manchin from West Virginia, you will vote for this nominee or you'll probably lose your seat.
Yeah. John Tester.
Yeah, there's a few others that are going to be pressured. So
I think they're going to get some Democratic votes on this.
So even if they were to lose, the Republicans were to lose the Murkowski and Collins, which I don't think they will. They don't lose them. They would still probably have enough votes. So I think.
And John McCain might not come to vote because of his brain tumor.
But they're still going to end up with, probably 2 or 3 Democrat votes and all the Republican votes. So this person is going to get through. And they're going to, I think they're going to pick somebody really good. So looking at the list, if people don't understand this, there were 21 people on the original list. Gorsuch was chosen. So now there were 20. They added 5. A year ago or however long ago it was.
25, yeah.
And so now they're looking at those. Trump has promised yet again he will pick from the list. And there are many excellent choices on the list. So there are great people on there. The ones that are being talked about right now are, if you'll remember last time, for instance, at the very end, it was between Gorsuch and Hardiman.
And that was the other name I was going. Thomas Hardiman out of Pennsylvania.
Yeah. And
Third Circuit Court.
Hardiman would be really interesting because he's unlike a Gorsuch or some of the others who are like Ivy League. Hardiman is more of a guy who, he drove a taxi cab to help put himself through law school.
That's right. I love the story about him.
He's got, I don't know, there's something about that Trump base and the working people in Ohio and those places that he would fit, and he would be a different kind of appointment. But so he's one of the choices, and then we'll get to the new ones they're looking at, after the break.
One other one I might mention, Thomas Hardiman sits on the court with Donald Trump's sister.
Yes. They're different parties, though.
Different parties. We'll be right back.
The Trump administration has just made it easier for small businesses to offer health insurance to their employees. Obamacare didn't change the health insurance picture much for large companies, but it imposes rules and mandates on small businesses that have raised their costs and caused more and more of them to decide not to offer health insurance to employees at all. The Department of Labor has finalized a rule that will enable more employers to form association health plans, AHPs. Implementation began last week. Alex Acosta, U.S. Secretary of Labor, describes how these health plans work in a Wall Street Journal op-ed entitled, "A Health Fix for Mom and Pop Shops." He writes, small businesses, including self-employed workers, may band together by geography or industry to obtain health care coverage as if they were a single large employer. This new scale and access, he writes, means AHPs can offer more options at a better price. These AHPs will enjoy the economies of scale and larger risk pools that large companies benefit from. And like large companies, they will escape requirements to provide many comprehensive benefits mandated under Obamacare. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that in the next few years, around 4 million Americans will enroll in AHPs, and of those, 400,000 will be folks who are currently uninsured. The plans will still be subject to Obamacare's rules regarding coverage for pre-existing conditions and its bans on lifetime limits. Congress still could and should repeal the Affordable Care Act. Obamacare is also being challenged again in court. The individual mandate to purchase health insurance, with its penalty, which the Supreme Court earlier ruled was a tax, was done away with in the 2017 tax cut bill. So 20 states are suing again to strike down Obamacare. Meanwhile, this new rule chips away at Obamacare. Secretary Acosta says President Trump will take action to provide whatever relief is within executive authority. The relief is welcome. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is our weekend edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford, and we've talked about a couple of possible nominees, the short list for the Supreme Court. I might also mention a second article, which we'll get to in just a minute, came out by Matt Vespo. Washington Post to Democrats, your argument to block filling the Justice Kennedy vacancy is bogus. I think Kelly's going to agree with that, too. But before we get to the arguments being said that we should not vote on this individual while there's a cloud over the president because of the Russian investigation, or we should not vote on this because we now have a precedent we can't vote in an election year, let me get to one other individual, and that is Justice Amy Coney Barrett. That's what they're saying, that Judge Amy Coney Barrett could actually be justice. And again, that would be a woman on the court. an individual that is a mother of 7 child. You told me off air that she's adopted some. She has 9 children. Dianne Feinstein was worried that the dogma lives loudly within her. So, Penna, what do we know about a possible female on the court?
Well, she's written a lot. She's been a professor at Notre Dame Law School. And so, they have what she's written, and I think that's what prompted Dianne Feinstein to do that during her confirmation on to a circuit court back in the fall, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot about that, and it was like, in a sense, it sounded like a religious test a little bit coming out of Dianne Feinstein. So she's young, she's a woman, and there's some concern about, we've got 2 very pro-abortion sort of rhino Republicans in the Senate, female. There's Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Susan Collins of Maine. And so to perhaps appeal to her, even though Amy Barrett is pro-life, this might appeal to them in a sense. So to get their votes. And, it is 51-49, but we have those 2. We have the fact, as you said, that John McCain might not be there. We have a couple of senators like Jeff Flake, who likes to make trouble, who are leaving the Senate and might not care as much. But still, because of Harry Reid, and this was a piece by Eric Erickson this week thanking Harry Reid because
I saw that.
He got rid of the filibuster in judicial nominations, and then we continued. Mitch McConnell went ahead and did it for the Supreme Court for the Gorsuch vote. And so, but Harry Reid started that ball rolling, so we will not have to worry about a cloture vote on that. So I agree with Kelly. I don't really think you need to use identity politics, elevate a woman or whatever to get the right person. I think any of these people on this list could be confirmed. One other person who's out there who's been supported by, for instance, Ted Cruz is Senator Mike Lee, because Mike Lee would be able to get probably the entire Republican side of the Senate to vote for him. He makes trouble for some of those people because he's so conservative, so they might want to get rid of him from the Senate. But also, he's well respected, so he is on the list.
Yeah, the ones you're hearing right now, I mean, obviously we talked about Hardiman because he was one of the final 2 last time for Gorsuch. So I think no matter what, Hardiman is in the wings, although you're not going to see a lot of articles about him because he's not the shiny new object, right? The shiny new objects are a focus on Mike Lee, who is a senator, a focus on Amy Coney Barrett, and a focus on Brett Kavanaugh. That's who the articles are all talking about right now. Mike Lee would be very different because he's the only one on the list who's not a current judge. And they typically like somebody who's a judge so they can see, what they will do as a judge. And Mike Lee, though, I think very few people have doubt about what he was doing as a judge. He is so a principled constitutionalist.
He's written books on the subject, yes.
He just lives it, yes. Right? I think his difficulty is that he has a lot of statements that he gave that were very anti-Trump. And if he were to go through this process, I'm sure that would be a theater that the media would love to create. Yeah. So that's a decision will have to be made. And with Amy Coney Barrett, the issue is she's been wonderful. She's written great things. Her hearing is probably what's most known about. She was attacked for her faith, both by Feinstein and by Durbin.
Right.
And she responded very well and did not waffle or sort of compromise in her answer. She stood for her faith, and it ended up really, I think, looking very bad for the senators who attacked her. Her downside is she's only been on the court a few months. And she just doesn't have, she's got an academic history, but not the court history. And then with Kavanaugh, you've got somebody, and I've known Brett for many years. Jay Sekulow and myself and Kavanaugh actually worked together on the case way in the past. And he's been a guy who's been a very loyal sort of on the conservative team and for administrations and done a lot of great work. But again, how are somebody as a judge? He's been a judge now for a number of years. It is very bright, is seen with great respect. But when you've been a judge for that long, opposite Amy Coney Barrett, where you don't have enough, with Brett Kavanaugh, you do have some big decisions that are like, where people are writing, all kinds of decisions. And so some people won't like what he wrote in that decision versus somebody else. And so there's those kinds of disputes. So that's why I think they're floating these new people, because they want to see what people think. And the reality is, I think most likely all of these people they're in the vein and the mindset of trying to be a proper judge. They're not activist judge. They don't believe you look at the result you want first based upon what I feel and then try to explain it. They think you should actually follow the law. You should actually put yourself under the law, and it's not about what you think is right or good. It's about you simply applying the law, and if the legislature needs to change it, that's who needs to change it. But I think if you'll watch, you're going to see a lot more here in the beginning about Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, Mike Lee, but I think Hardiman is one that's not being talked about, that clearly is in the top rung somewhere when the president gets down to his top three.
That was the case with Gorsuch, because when we first started talking about it, the Gorsuch name was unknown. We didn't know who he was. And then it was like he sort of slid his way up into the top spot, or up the top two, by the time the president made the nomination. So that brings up a question, Kelly. I'm wondering how long you think it will take the president to land on someone.
I think this one's going to be faster, a lot faster. Last time, I think that could be dangerous. I mean, I hope they don't move too fast, but I think they need feedback behind the scenes from people who have understanding on these different people, what the downsides and upsides are, and all that to come out, so that they can. Because I think you're right. I think there were some people who had some issues that might have been towards the top, but by the time they got to the end, they were at Gorsuch and Hardiman, who would both be, I think, really good choices. And Gorsuch was an excellent choice. But they're talking about having this pick, announced by July, because they want this done through the process and over by September, so that in October, when the session starts for the court, the new justice will be sitting.
Yes. We need to take a break, and when we come back, we'll spend some time talking with John Lott. But as I've said before, this is the last day of the last week of our fiscal year. And if you, even as you've been listening to this, say, well, I heard some things I didn't know before, and I'm so glad I tuned into Point of View. Maybe that's reason enough for you to consider what you might do to support this ministry. We are dependent upon your gifts to bring this program to you, and we have a couple of ways in which you can do it. First of all, you can go to the website, and I would encourage you to do that. I know some people don't like to do that because they love to hear all the conversation taking place, so you can do that very quickly and just click on that button that says Donate. And again, we have a matching fund, so that means your gift of $50 becomes $100, $100 becomes $200. But also, since we're coming to a break, this would be a good time to call the pledge line number, 800-347-5151. We have a financial need. We have a match on the table. You probably heard some things today that you have not heard before. That's reason enough to support what we do here at Point of View. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll spend a few minutes talking with John Lott. Then we'll get into some other very important cases that you probably haven't heard about. We'll be right back.
Every story has the same conclusion, the end. For the past few weeks, we've been sharing quite a few stories with happy endings, stories that Point of View Truth Team members, listeners like you, have literally made possible. But today, we reach the final page of our fiscal year. What we accomplish together in the next 12 months will in great measure be based on what happens in the next handful of hours. If you have yet to give this month, or if you can give again and have your heroic impact doubled by our matching challenge, we are asking one more time, whatever the amount, your gift could write the next big story. This is it. The page is turning. Please don't let the book close without making one more phone call to 1-800-347-5151 or making a few simple clicks to pointofview.net. Invest in happy endings. Make a difference for the future, and that future is now. The clock is ticking. The end is here. Today is the final day. 1-800-347-5151. and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you've been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Once again, here on Point of View, it is our weekend edition. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. And just for a few minutes, we also have with us Dr. John Lott. You are familiar with him because he's been on the program so many times before. We've talked about his book, More Guns, Less Crime, Freedonomics, a PhD in economics from UCLA, and is the founder of the Crime Prevention Research Center. Dr. John Lott, it is always great to have you on the program.
Well, thanks very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Shooting yesterday in Annapolis, but I wanted to look at the broader issue because you have said something in some of your articles that Kelly Shackelford has said. And, of course, we've had a policy for some time in which we don't say the name of the shooter. We've said around this table we should have no naming and we should have more shaming. What are your thoughts?
All right. I agree completely. I think one of the things that the media may come to regret, unfortunately, is if they treat a shooting like this where they go and they say this was the worst shooting involving media people, and they give it more attention than they otherwise would because it does involve media people, then you're going to encourage people to go and attack the media because the individuals who want to try to go and get attention, if they believe that by going and killing other media people that the media is going to give them more attention than they would otherwise, if they can go and beat 5 now, you're going to have some unintended consequences from giving it that type of coverage.
And again, I want to get some comments around the table, but let me just add one thing that you've put together, and that is because you've done the research, you've looked at the Sandy Hook killer. I'll just use one illustration. And as I understand, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I think of what you found is that he spent more than 2 years studying public shootings, came up together with a 7-foot-long, 4-foot-wide spreadsheet with names and body counts and weapons. And it really was his goal to kill more people than the Norwegian man that killed 77 people. So these are individuals that want to make a name for themselves in the most bizarre way you can possibly imagine. And when we say who they are, we say their names, we don't call them cowards, we don't shame them, we're encouraging it, don't you think?
Right. Well, I mean, the spreadsheet that he put together had what you mentioned, plus he had also the number of media stories on each of the attacks. And he graphed it out, showing the relationship between the number of people killed and the number of how much media coverage it received. And his goal was to go and, as you say, kill more people than the Norwegian killer who had the lead at the time. If you ignore the bombing deaths, had 67 people that he shot to death and 110 wounded from shooting, because he wanted to get more worldwide coverage than that killer had gotten.
John, thank you so much for being here. This is Penna Dexter. You know, when we have these high-profile shootings, of course, the left immediately goes to guns, as if they shoot themselves. But in this case, as we're getting news reports, we're already seeing warning signs, people that were worried at this newspaper that something like this might happen. And so I know that you're one that studies these situations. Are we remiss in law enforcement in not taking some of these warnings more seriously?
don't know enough about this case yet, but one of the problems that you have is kind of Monday morning quarterbacking. It's a lot easier to kind of interpret signs as being a warning that this guy was going to do something kind of after the fact. People put more importance onto different things. I'm not saying that that was the case here. It may have been a very clear case that people should have done something about it. But that's often not the case. When you read these, when you delve into these cases, you often find that people are now attaching great significance to things that, it was understandable that they didn't attach huge significance to these things. I'll give you one example. Over the last 20 years, about 60% of the mass public shooters were actually seeing mental health care professionals prior to their attacks. And, except for possibly the Texas church shooter that we had last fall, who had escaped from the mental health care facility where he was incarcerated, there's not a case where one of these mental health care professionals identified these individuals that they were seeing as a danger to themselves or a danger to somebody else. And in fact, there's a whole academic literature out there where they talk about their inability to identify these individuals properly beforehand. So, we have something like 2.5 million schizophrenics in the country. You look at the rate that they go and kill in these mass public shootings, and you're talking about an incredibly tiny rate. I mean, and so if I were to go and tell you, pick the 1,000 worst or most likely killers out of schizophrenics, it's very likely that even assuming that you get somebody in there, you're talking about 1 out of 1,000 or something like that. And these are very rare cases that you have. And also, people with mental health problems tend to be less violent on average than the general population. They also tend to be more likely to be victims of violence than the general population. And so, given how rare it is, even among people that have well-defined illnesses, well-defined serious illnesses, it's not too surprising that they have this difficulty in identifying these guys. And they're not stupid. Usually the guys who do these attacks are fairly bright individuals. You have somebody like the Santa Barbara killer. He was actually seeing 3 mental health care professionals prior to his attack. One of them was the head of child psychiatry at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, a worldwide recognized expert. Particularly, his expertise was in terms of violence by these patients. And this individual also had not identified that killer as a danger to others or himself.
Incredible. Well, again, we have been talking with John Lott. I know he's going to have to head on, but I wanted to say again that he has the website Crime Prevention Research Center, which is crimeresearch.org. And I just wanted to get you on for a moment, at least to talk about Annapolis. And again, we'll get you on in the future to talk about some of the other stories that are coming down the pike. But thank you again for your research, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you very much.
We will take a break, and we have a roundtable discussion we'll have right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The president and some members of Congress have started an important conversation about criminal justice reform, but while we're having that conversation, it is crucial that we get some of the facts straight. At a recent conference, Senator Elizabeth Warren lamented this country criminalizes low-level drug offenses. She said more people are locked up for low-level offenses on marijuana than for all violent crimes in this country. That makes no sense at all. She is certainly correct. It doesn't make any sense. That's because it isn't true. Rafael Mangual, in a recent op-ed, looks at the numbers. The total incarcerated population in the U.S. is just over 2.1 million. In the federal prisons, there is a high percentage serving time for drug offenses, but these are not pot smokers. Most are federal drug traffickers. In the state prisons, only about 15% are serving time for a drug offense. Again, the vast majority are in for trafficking. And it's worth mentioning that even the small percentage in for drug possession may have settled on that charge after a plea bargain. In addition to the argument that we're putting people in prison for minor drug offenses is the argument that we're also putting too many black men behind bars. Let's begin by stating the obvious. There is a racial disparity. African Americans make up about 13% of the population, meaning that black men make up about 6.5% of the American population. Nevertheless, they make up approximately one-third of state prison populations. The latest figures from the Bureau of Justice show that blacks constitute 35% of violent offenders, 45% of weapons offenders, 27% of property offenders, and 31% of drug offenders. Those figures explain why more black men are behind bars and illustrate why we need to get some of these facts straight. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is a roundtable discussion, and we just had John Lott on with us for a few minutes, and I'd love to go around the roundtable and get some comments. And one of those, Penna, is that John Lott, I think, just drove home the fact that this idea that we can identify those individuals, not going to happen. The idea that we're going to get rid of all the guns, not going to happen. So you got to come up with some other alternatives.
Yeah, and I mean, you can take
easy.
the title of his book, More Guns, Less Crime. I mean, really, the idea that you have, or that a person committing these acts doesn't know who's armed when he is there doing so would be a deterrent in many cases, or it would at least stop the damage or limit the damage to, once it starts, if a lot of people are armed and if there aren't these restrictions in some of these public places, then everybody's a little bit safer. He had to go, so we didn't get to go there with him, but I think if you just look at the title of his book, you kind of get that.
And a lot of it is what can you do before and what can you do after? And one of the things, Kelly, you've talked about over the years is after. Why are we giving these individuals any kind of prominence? If we started shaming them, if we started calling them cowards, if they didn't want to get their name in the newspaper, maybe that would stop. And when I read that piece about the Sandy Hook killer for 2 years studying this so that he can be at the top of the list, we got to do something different.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of basic. I don't know why we've stopped doing that. We shouldn't name the person, and we should describe them in ways that they're a coward, that, and these are all males, right? I mean, that no man would do that, that you don't shoot innocent people, what a wimp, all these kinds of things. I think all of a sudden these young men wouldn't be wanting that publicity because that's not how they want to go. I think we're making a big mistake. I think we would find a dramatic reduction in the number of these things if we started as a society treating it as we should be treating it.
Back to what Penna said, one of the things that John Lotz pointed out is, let's just take the one shooter in Aurora, Colorado. He actually drove past various movie theaters where you were allowed to have concealed carry to go to the theater that did not allow guns because it was tied into a mall. To think that these people are stupid, I mean, some of them are mentally imbalanced, that's for sure. Some of them maybe aren't the brightest knives in the drawer, but most of the time they're using some level of intelligence to figure out where they can get the largest kill ratio. And when you have these signs essentially that say, nobody in this building is armed, so you can do a lot of damage before the police show up. And to the credit of the police in Maryland, Annapolis, Maryland, they showed up within a minute, from what I understand. So congratulations to law enforcement in that case.
Yeah, I know. Just to see that sign's supposed to make you feel safer, but it doesn't make you safer.
So again, just a couple of other issues we wanted to put on the table, but I had one left over, and that is when we talk about filling the vacancy by Justice Kennedy, Senator Chuck Schumer said, quote, our Republican colleagues in the Senate should follow the rule they set in 2016 not to consider a Supreme Court justice in an election year. Kelly, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I mean, I'm just amazed at these people sometimes. They say some of the dumbest things. Maybe if we say in an election year that we can be vague enough and everybody won't understand that it's a presidential election year that we're talking about. What happened, they're upset because of the last year of Obama's term, that it was a presidential election year, and that they therefore didn't have a vote, which we've almost never had a vote on a Supreme Court justice during a presidential election year. But when it comes to midterm elections, we do it all the time. We have all the time. I mean, it's the first 2 years is when people usually step down and their slots are filled. That happened. I mean, 3 or 4 of the justices right now were appointed, nominated and confirmed during a midterm election year. Kind of fuzzing over the difference there it's just really silly. Like somebody wouldn't catch that. So you hear some of these things. And it's why people don't pay attention to what politicians say a lot of times, because it's just completely worthless. This is a silly argument. It's not the truth. It's not the history. This nominee by the president, whoever it is, will be confirmed this year, period. So Chuck Schumer can say whatever he wants. As silly as it is, it's not going to make any difference. And he's totally wrong about what he's saying.
And again, Elena Kagan confirmed in 2010, so that was one of those midterm ones. So those are just a couple of things. By the way, that article, if you'd like to read it, it goes on for 3 pages, so it gives you some counterpoint in case you find yourself in a Facebook debate or discussion or something like that. It's the second article we've posted here. But I did want to come back to something else, and that is we did mention this in our local hour, the first hour, but most of our listeners have not had a chance to hear about what's happened at First Liberty. And they might remember a woman by the name of Marianne Sauce who was told that she could not pray in her home. And interestingly enough, the Supreme Court didn't actually hear oral arguments, but they actually rendered a decision. Explain that, if you might.
Yeah, this we said this week was going to be some fireworks, but it was more fireworks than we even knew was coming. We filed Coach Kennedy lawsuit in the Supreme Court. On Monday, we filed the Bladensburg Veterans Memorial on Monday in the Supreme Court. We had the NIFLA case come down on Tuesday. And then the very last day of the term, when the court sort of leaves the country to go to do their teaching and different things in other countries in Europe, et cetera, there's a miscellaneous list that's the last thing they leave to take care of everything else. And on that was a number of things interesting to us, including our case with Marianne Sauce, where they not only they granted the case saying we're taking it, and then they reversed the decision and sent it back down. So a really good piece of news for us and especially for Marianne Sauce, and so who's been really waiting for a long time on this. They've had it. The way it works is the 9 justices sit once every few weeks, and they go through all the requests and make a decision. And Mary Ann's case was sitting on their list, and it came through, and they made the decisions on all the cases, but they relisted hers for the next time. So they kind of bumped it to the next one. And then we got to the next one. Well, this happened 15 times. So we were like, what is going on? And, well, now we see. They were going to be issuing a decision. They said, we don't even need to hear oral arguments. We can make a decision and send this back down and reverse what's happened. And so that's certainly a good result, and one that we weren't expecting to happen on the very last day of the term, but we're really grateful it did.
So with Mary Ann's case, the officers were in her home, and she was really actually critiqued and criticized for praying in her own home. So what happens now? I mean, it was the idea that they would be immune from any kind of sanction for doing that to her. So now, is there the possibility that those officers will receive some sort of reprimand?
Yeah, all that decision has been, revoked, and it's going back down, and now we start all over without that protection. So that's important. One of the things I forgot to mention that I do want to mention is one of the things that really helped us in this appeal to the Supreme Court was the Texas Attorney General filed a really helpful brief that ended up, I think, having a real impact on the decision. So people sometimes wonder if it matters, who your elected official is. It really does on some of these cases. So we were really grateful for Attorney General Paxton, who not only filed a supportive brief, because a lot of the AGs will do that, if they see something they agree with or that's important to the people of their state, they'll even join on one brief and they'll file something. But this was beyond supportive. It was a really clever and true argument that actually seemed to have an impact on the court in helping rule for Mary Ann. So kudos to Attorney General Ken Paxton in Texas, and kudos to all those other attorney generals out there who are doing good work and filing in important constitutional cases, because this case affects every citizen, right? I mean, if the police are immune when they come and tell you can't pray in your own home, then that's a precedent that affects all of us. So to have that reversed is, I think, good for all Americans.
I want to come back and talk about some of the prayer cases, one in which you have an interesting conflict between the 6th District Court and the 4th Circuit and what that might mean. And so we'll get into that in just a minute. And, of course, also Coach Kennedy. That's a prayer case as well. But, again, as we're coming to a break, this is a great chance for you to support this ministry. And if you haven't had a chance to call the pledge line number, that's 800-347-5151, 1-800-387 1-800-347-5151. And, of course, the website is pointofview.net. We have a match on the table, and the match goes away tonight, so that's why we need to hear from you today. As a matter of fact, right now. So can you give us a call, 800-347-5151, or again, the website, pointofview.net. A match on the table. It's a great opportunity for you to double your donation to this ministry. We'll be right back.
Every story has the same conclusion, the end. For the past few weeks, we've been sharing quite a few stories with happy endings, stories that Point of View Truth Team members, listeners like you, have literally made possible. But today, we reach the final page of our fiscal year. What we accomplish together in the next 12 months will in great measure be based on what happens in the next handful of hours. If you have yet to give this month, or if you can give again and have your heroic impact doubled by our matching challenge, we are asking one more time, whatever the amount, your gift could write the next big story. This is it. The page is turning. Please don't let the book close without making one more phone call to 1-800-347-5151 or making a few simple clicks to pointofview.net. Invest in happy endings. Make a difference for the future, and that future is now. The clock is ticking. The end is here. Today is the final day. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. Let me just mention, I have not done a very good job of mentioning you can join us on the air if you'd like to do so. I have found this week that as we've been going through these cases, not a lot of you are calling because as I've had a chance to talk to some of you, you just want to hear what Kelly has to say or what Chelsea has to say or what Penna has to say or what Nick Pitts has to say. Even sometimes I like to hear what I have to say. But nevertheless, if you'd like to join our conversation, as we've talked about everything from guns to religious liberty, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. But Kelly, I'm going to put you on the spot one more time because this one is a head scratcher. And that is, I don't know too much about the law, but I know enough that when one circuit court has a ruling in one direction and another circuit court has a ruling in a different direction, when they contradict, that almost by definition requires the Supreme Court to step in. True?
Usually, yeah. When that's the whole reason the Supreme Court turns down so many cases. They maybe get 7,000 requests and take 70 cases. So odds are not with you. What cases are they taking? Typically, they're going to take something when there's a conflict in the circuits. When in one federal court of appeals or two or three or however many, the law means one thing, and when it means something different, well, they can't allow that. The Constitution can't change over state lines. And so of all of our cases that were on our way this year to the Supreme Court, this is the one that these are the two that everybody thought was kind of a no-brainer, and that is the Jackson County, Michigan case and the Rowan County, North Carolina case, because they're almost the exact same facts. What it's about is, the question is, can a county commissioner open up their county commission meetings with prayer? And you might think, if you're really knowledgeable, you might think, hey, wait, 3 years ago there was a Supreme Court case on that called Town of Greece versus Galloway, which was about whether a municipality can open up with prayer. Well, that involved a chaplain or ministers. And so the argument by the ACLU is, well, that doesn't really imply, because this time it's actually the county commissioners themselves. And we had this case both go to the Fourth Circuit in Rowan County and the Sixth Circuit, which is Jackson County, Michigan. And you normally get 3 judges on the Federal Court of Appeals at random. But if it's really, really something unique, very crucial, all 15 will sit and hear one case. That's called en banc. And that happened in the Fourth Circuit. It also happened in the Sixth Circuit. So really unusual. And then something more really unusual occurred. They came to exactly opposite conclusions.
Just amazing.
So the law on the exact same facts now changes in like these 8 or 9 states, depending upon which state line you just crossed. Well, that's like you got to take it at the Supreme Court, right? Well, again, on the last day of the term this week, the Supreme Court denied cert in both of these cases, which what that means is they didn't take it. In the Jackson County case, we're like, okay, great, we won, so we keep our victory.
Right.
In the Rowan County case, we're like, whoa, you didn't overturn this. We lost. And but a dissent was written from not taking the Rowan County, and it was written by Justice Thomas and Gorsuch, where they essentially said, how can you not take this? You can't have the law change from this state to this state to this state. And I agree with them. I don't know. I mean, hey, I appreciate the win in Michigan and in the Sixth Circuit, but now this thing is wide open, and we're going to have to, keep fighting this and eventually get the court to solve this, because you've got the law meaning different things in different states right now across the country.
So keeping fighting means other cases with the same types of facts. So, Kelly, I mean, hasn't it been forever since the beginning of our country that people who are elected officials, commissioners, legislators, or whatever could lead a prayer before a meeting?
We've had it. I mean, the founders, when they were founding our country, opened in prayer. They prayed themselves. They've done so in the legislature. And just think about this argument, by the way. What do you think is worse? A legislator who's in, let's say they're a congressional member, or let's say they're your city council member, or let's say they're your your county commissioner. What's worse, for them to just say a prayer to open the meeting, or for them to use taxpayer money to hire a chaplain and to have the chaplain pray? Which one do you think would be more of a question? Well, the chaplain being paid by taxpayer money, that happened in the United States Congress. We still have a chaplain to this day. Those are opened in prayer, and that specific scenario has been affirmed as totally constitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court. So the idea that now a county commissioner can't pray, I think, is really silly. But again, the Fourth Circuit is now rivaling the Ninth Circuit as the most left-wing, kind of out-of-touch circuit in the country, and so. But in this case, they got away with it because the court didn't take the case. I think if they had taken the case, this would have been a clear reversal, but they didn't. And so in all those states now in the Fourth Circuit, things are messed up, and we're going to have to keep filing these lawsuits until we get one in the Supreme Court and make sure that the Constitution actually applies across the country and not just in some states.
Now, we have listeners in Maryland, Virginia, and places like that, which are the Fourth Circuit. And talk about that for just a minute, because I think it illustrates again how in 8 years President Obama was able to change things. Because when he started his term after George W. Bush had been in for 8 years, I think you could make the case that the liberal court was in the Ninth Circuit.
Yes.
But he was able to change over 8 years a significant number of those circuit courts, which also says how maybe Donald Trump is going to change some of them back. Speak to that, if you might.
Well, yeah, what happened is George Bush left a number of those seats open. And so as a result, it was a dramatic switch in the Fourth Circuit from really what had been a somewhat conservative circuit to now, I think, probably the most liberal in the country. Yeah. And that's important because they cover all that area right around D.C. in addition to other areas. So it's really a change. But you're right. I mean, President Trump will now have the opportunity to change that around. He has already appointed, I think it's 1/8, if I'm not mistaken, but he has already replaced a huge percentage of the Court of Appeals just in a year and a half. So I think it depends upon the election and does he hold the Senate, because in order for him to get his judicial confirmation through, the Senate would have to be Republican and approving of his nominations. Assuming he holds the Senate, he'll have another 2 years. And then it'll be a question of, does he have another 4 years after that? But just in 2 years, it's been pretty dramatic on the Court of Appeals, the change that he's made.
One other thing I thought maybe you could educate us on, it's rare anymore that we have any one of these circuit courts that are at full capacity because we have so many open seats. True?
Yeah, there's a lot of, there are, I think, over 100, 120 or so seats being filled right now, District Court, Court of Appeals. The biggest problem there's about 80 sitting in the Senate waiting for their votes. And why are they waiting for their votes? Because the Democrats are playing this game where, for the first time in the history of the country, they're using this rule that really is about allowing debate when you have a conflict over somebody. Mm-hmm. They're just using it to kind of clog up all the nominations so that they can't get through. However, Leader McConnell has publicly stated that will come to an end this year, that, in his words, I'm getting all of these judges through. I think there's about 70 or 80 that are waiting for votes. And so step one of that people saw is he said there will be no August recess.
I noticed that.
And look, the Democrats really need to be home because most of those seats that are up for election are Democrat seats. I think it's out of the 36, maybe 26 are Democrat. So they can't afford to not be campaigning, to be sitting in D.C. And so I think we're going to see a lot of this stuff break loose, in August or so as McConnell starts to make sure that all these people, these nominations of the president actually get voted on. But we'll have to wait and see what happens because they also have a Supreme Court nominee to worry about as well.
And as you pointed out before, not only have they been slow-walking the nominees by Donald Trump, they were even slow-walking some that were left over from the Obama administration that Trump put on there. So it's the craziest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, they're not just slowing it down for ones they disagree with. The ones that are unanimously voted on, they're still insisting upon, the 30 hours of debate and all this, and they don't have any objection to them. So it's all a delay tactic, which I think that's really bad. I think when you elect the president, he should have his people to do the jobs. If somebody's got a serious problem, then yes, that's why you do advice and consent of the Senate. But I think the idea of just mucking things up and slowing it down and not allowing whoever the president is to have his people in the cabinets and all this, I think that's really bad. And I think that's something that really should be stopped for the future.
Let's take a break. And those of you that listen online, you'll hear Penna Dexter's commentary on healthcare associations. I thought we'd come back and get her comments on that real quickly as well. And just one more benefit of signing up, because if you sign up to get the Viewpoints commentaries, mine come to your inbox Monday through Friday. Hers will come on Saturday. We'll be right back.
The Trump administration has just made it easier for small businesses to offer health insurance to their employees. Obamacare didn't change the health insurance picture much for large companies, but it imposes rules and mandates on small businesses that have raised their costs and caused more and more of them to decide not to offer health insurance to employees at all. The Department of Labor has finalized a rule that will enable more employers to form association health plans, AHPs. Implementation began last week. Alex Acosta, U.S. Secretary of Labor, describes how these health plans work in a Wall Street Journal op-ed entitled, "A Health Fix for Mom-and-Pop Shops." He writes, small businesses, including self-employed workers, may band together by geography or industry to obtain health care coverage as if they were a single large employer. This new scale and access, he writes, means AHPs can offer more options at a better price. These AHPs will enjoy the economies of scale and larger risk pools that large companies benefit from. And like large companies, they will escape requirements to provide many comprehensive benefits mandated under Obamacare. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that in the next few years, around 4 million Americans will enroll in AHPs, and of those, 400,000 will be folks who are currently uninsured. The plans will still be subject to Obamacare's rules regarding coverage for pre-existing conditions and its bans on lifetime limits. Congress still could and should repeal the Affordable Care Act. Obamacare is also being challenged again in court. The individual mandate to purchase health insurance, with its penalty, which the Supreme Court earlier ruled was a tax, was done away with in the 2017 tax cut bill. So 20 states are suing again to strike down Obamacare. Meanwhile, this new rule chips away at Obamacare. Secretary Acosta says President Trump will take action to provide whatever relief is within executive authority. The relief is welcome. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and we'll go around the round table. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and if you've been listening online, you certainly hear at this particular time, we actually play the Viewpoints commentaries, and we always play Penna Dexter's at that particular hour. The Trump administration has made it easier for small businesses to offer health insurance to their employees because of these associations, and we've talked about that once or twice here on the program, but fill us in a little bit, Penna.
Well, Obamacare was not repealed, as many people ran on doing so, and it didn't happen. Not that Congress didn't try to do so. And back when it was challenged in the Supreme Court, Justice Roberts wrote the opinion, and it was upheld as a tax. So what the Trump administration tries to do now with Obamacare is to sort of make it make it easier for certain people to get insurance.
Right.
And if you work for a big company, you probably didn't see a big change when Obamacare came because your insurance plan pretty much stayed the same. But with smaller businesses, it made it very, very difficult for them to offer insurance to their employees. So the Trump administration has done something. It was nothing that Congress did or could do. Maybe they could act on this later, but what they did was they issued something through the Department of Health and Human Services, which will allow small businesses to band together to offer health plans and sort of have a sort of cooperative associations. Even employees who are self-employed, maybe the Uber driver, for instance, can band together so they can get economies of scale, and they can then offer better insurance policies at more affordable premiums. And so this was announced by Secretary Acosta of Health and Human Services, and it's really a good thing. It could actually make a big difference with regard to employers being able to offer health plans. Now, it doesn't mean that Obamacare should not be repealed. It still should be. And it doesn't mean that Congress, even if it doesn't repeal Obamacare, shouldn't act to try to do some of these things. But I think and this is what Secretary Acosta said, is that President Trump is going to take action to, in whatever realm of power that he has to do so, he is going to try to fix the healthcare system through executive action. That's not the best way to do things, as we know, because then when another administration comes, they can reverse it. Right. But again, it does make life better for small businesses and for people who are self-employed, who are really oftentimes being priced out of the insurance market.
We talked about these healthcare associations ideas with Foster Freeze and Dr. Merrill Matthews. And so if you'd like to read a little bit more about that, Penna Dexter's commentary is on the website. Kelly Shackelford, we have as our first article here under your picture, it's Christmas in July. So the good news is you got kind of a summary there. Now, if people click through, it will take them to firstliberty.org. The first thing pops up there is Liberty Flash News. But also, there's a place where people can sign up to get your newsletter, because this is where I think the real battle is going to take place. We're going to have a battle over who is the nominee, but also just to kind of a prayer target about whether or not the Supreme Court will take some of those cases that you're talking about.
Yeah, those, if people who are on our list got an email as soon as the Supreme Court issued their ruling, reversing the decision in our favor in the Marianne South case. So the only way, and with the way things are these days, with your Facebook or Google or whatever, there's a lot of censorship, a lot of as our guest said on here, a lot of sort of algorithms and stuff that keep things through you from getting to you. So the only way you can get it is to get it directly. So I would encourage people, if they're not getting the information from First Liberty, to go to pointofview.net, click on the First Liberty a website and go there. And look, I'll say this both for Point of View and First Liberty. For a lot of ministries, us included, First Liberty, who does religious freedom, and Point of View, which is how all this great information gets out. This is the end of the fiscal year. So this decides how you end up and therefore what you are able to plan for the next year. So the next few days are really important. And so I would encourage people, it's really easy to do now. You can go on a website and simply make a credit card donation, and it really will impact the plans that people make for the next year for their ministry. So like for us, how many cases can we take? How many cases can we have at the Supreme Court? How much effort can we put into the Supreme Court effort on, judicial nominations, or even the lower court judicial nominations? All that is affected with us on how many people we have, how many people can vet the information of these different prospects. I mean, all that's affected by, you've got to have resources in order to do that. And Point of View has to have resources to get this out all over the country.
If you want to be an influencer, I mean, some people would say, oh, I wish I could be a lawyer like Kelly Shackelford and protect religious liberty, or I want to be like Kerby and be able to tell millions of people about these issues and how they can look at it through a Christian worldview and how they can make a difference. Well, most people are frustrated because they can't do that. They can vote, but you can do so much more. And really, the way to do it is just to ask the Lord what he would have you do financially to help Point of View, to help First Liberty, to get the word out, to get the information out, because we do it not only through our radio show, but also through our website where we post all kinds of information. We also have these wonderful guests that can illuminate these subjects and help you understand them. And you can help. You can make a difference. And so right now it's important for us to know what you can do through pledges and also just through those hard gifts. And we ask that you do that. So pointofview.net is the website. And also you could give us a call on our it's our order line, really, our pledge line, 800-347-5151. So, I mean, it's the 29th. Tomorrow's the last day of the month, the end of the fiscal year. So we ask that you really think about it hard right now.
I think we'll keep the match till tomorrow, but it's over then. And again, some listen to this over the weekend, so we'll see. But I've had some people talking about the fact that they've been listening to Point of View and they've become more emboldened to ask questions. A couple have said that they have been more involved politically. Some of them said, to be honest with you, I never contacted my member of Congress, but you made it easier. So again, we have some great resources for you on the website today, including some of the material about an originalist court, how to answer some of the arguments that you're hearing, and a number of others, but also the take action item, a critical time to pray. I encourage you to get on the First Liberty list so that you are aware of those, and we will educate you about what is happening behind the scenes, especially as we look at these nominees and a vacancy on the Supreme Court. So just before we run out of time, let's again talk about how you can get involved. The first thing is we have a banner there that says "The Future is Now, Donate." And we have some stories of individuals that have been influenced in the past, and your gift helps actually equip and empower individuals to be very significant in their lives. So you're the winner for all of this, and we certainly need to hear from you as well. Let me also encourage you, as Penna did just a minute ago, 800-347-5151. And a preview for next week, we've got Jonathan Witt on. We'll be talking about intelligent design. Barry Creamer. Remember Barry Creamer? He's going to be in studio. You used to do an interview with him, and we have a number of other gifted individuals joining with us. And you have Mona Charon with you next Thursday, right? So
Mona Charon, she's a columnist, and a lot of people have enjoyed her work over the years. And she's written a book that's sort of the culmination of, I think, her personal and also public life about feminism, and we're going to unpack a little bit of that. I'm looking forward to it.
And then I think all of us are here today, but all of us are out next week. But Alan West is going to be sitting in this chair, so I think it's going to be a great week next week. But we are at the very end, so if you've been waiting to give, I know that is the tendency of all of our listeners. Our Truth Team Week, always more comes in on Friday than the other days combined sometimes. So if you've been waiting to the last day, this is the last day. This is the last few minutes. And so visit the website, pointofview.net. Click on that button that says donate, or you can give us a call. Even though we're going off the air, we'll still take those phone calls, 800-347-5151. Next week, it'll be a new fiscal year, but it's just going to be July for us. So I hope you'll join us then. Have a great weekend. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here on Monday.
Every story has the same conclusion: the end. For the past few weeks, we've been sharing quite a few stories with happy endings, stories that Point of View Truth Team members, listeners like you, have literally made possible. But today, we reach the final page of our fiscal year. What we accomplish together in the next 12 months will in great measure be based on what happens in the next handful of hours. If you have yet to give this month, or if you can give again and have your heroic impact doubled by our matching challenge, we are asking one more time, whatever the amount, your gift could write the next big story. This is it. The page is turning. Please don't let the book close without making one more phone call to 1-800-347-5151 or making a few simple clicks to pointofview.net. Invest in happy endings. Make a difference for the future, and that future is now. The clock is ticking. The end is here. Today is the final day. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.